So before jumping into the main content of our session today, just a couple of reminders. Please do keep your cameras on to create it interactive, and we'd love to see your faces as we move throughout the session, but please do stay muted so we can focus your attention on the speakers themselves. Please do check your status now in the bottom left-hand corner. That will help us a lot. Lastly, I would like you to just change your display name if you could. We'd love to get a sense of who's here and who's joining us. If you could right-click on your speaker window, it will give you the option to rename yourself. And if you could rename yourself starting with your name, followed by your organization, we'd really appreciate that. Finally, for anyone who may have joined us in the last couple of minutes, we will be recording this session, and by participating in it, you're giving your consent for us to record. Thank you very much. Now, later on in the session, we will be holding a panel Q&A with our speakers. Now, we have a platform where you can submit some of your questions through this Mentimeter throughout the session. So as the speakers are talking, feel free to add questions as we go. So you can scan the QR and you can click on the link to input your question. If you see a question that somebody else has already raised and you would also like to ask it, you can upvote that question by clicking on the little thumbs up. So do feel free throughout the session to please add your questions in as they come up. When we get to the panel Q&A, we can address those with our speakers and address some of the questions that are most pertinent to you. Now, why are we here today? We're in the third session of the Volunteer Management Network. We've been organizing these with VMPs such as yourselves, provide opportunities to learn from each other, from subject matter experts, and sharing best practices to ignite the collaboration between you. You all have different experiences within your different organizations, and this is a collective way of sharing learning and growing the sector as a whole. So thank you for joining us for session number 3, and please do take note of the 4th session in March to come as well. Now, I'll give you a quick run through of today's agenda and what we're going to be covering. We have 3 excellent speakers for you today. First of all, I will take you through some of the survey results from the online questions that you completed before joining us, give you a bit of context to today's session, and then we'll have 3 speakers with a little break in the middle. We'll also have an interactive activity for you, and we're going to do a group photo. So please do keep your videos on for that, and I'll inform you nearer the time when that's going to happen. So we'll have our 3 speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A panel and reflections, share some of the resources that NCSS has available to support you moving forward, and then we'll close by 5 o'clock. Thank you very much. So we'll jump into the survey questions and have a bit of a recap of those that you answered. Now, the first question, does your organization have a defined or documented risk management plan in place? It was great to see 62% of you say yes. However, there's still 38% of you we'd love to bring up to speed and obviously, hopefully take away some key learnings that you can help your organization with moving forward, as well as those in the yes bracket, some things that will help you refine your existing practices already. Now, those of you that said yes, in assessing the maturity level of your organization's risk management, you said that 21%, yes, we have it at a leadership level. And what do we mean by a leadership level? That it's implemented in the context of the broader organization from the top, but also down. It's implemented at all levels and is geared towards continuous improvement in risk management. The bulk of you said that your organization's risk management was at a managed or repeatable level. So this means that you do have tools to aid you with monitoring, measuring, and reporting some of your risks, but it might be less strategic, and some of the documentation may not be there. So the processes might exist, but they might not be fully integrated across the organization, and there's room to make that more integrated and scalable across all levels. Moving on to the next question. If you didn't have a predefined policy, what are the challenges that some of you faced in developing this risk management plan? Now, there was a clear winner here in the fact that you're unsure how to develop it. You recognize the need for the risk management, but what are the next steps that we can take? Where do we go from here? How do we implement them in our organization? So there was a key gap here that we need to address within the sector. There were some other considerations as well, that you had challenges in being unfamiliar with the concept of risk management, and then a few that we've listed there at the bottom as well that came out from our other section, which is a lack of manpower, resources. We might have a small or a new volunteer management team, and we might actually be in the process of putting in place a risk management plan, but we're really still trying to get it off the ground. So hopefully you can take some of the lessons from our speakers away today to really help you start kickstarting that progress with your SSA, with your organization, bringing that to fruition. Now, we also asked you what are some of the common risks that your organization faced. And again, there was some consistency here that the strongest one was people risk. That you might face risks associated with injury or harm to your service users or volunteers. You might struggle to retain some of your volunteers as well and engage those within the organization. Next was the confidentiality risk. That was a strong one as well. And that's really is referring to data, breach of confidential information. So there's, again, that's a close second. And then reputation risk and compliance risk came out with some pretty strong percentages there as well. So these are all areas of risk, along with a few others that we're going to speak about today, that are really worth bearing in mind. And how do we overcome those risks within our organization? So why are we focusing on the risk management for volunteer managers today with you? As your volunteer base strengthens and you involve volunteers more, they become more embedded at a deeper level in your organization. They can lead projects, they're leading other volunteers, they're moving into higher skilled roles. So naturally, this elevates the level of risk associated that comes with the volunteers. It's not a bad thing, but it's a natural occurrence with the increase in the volunteer sector. So we'd like you to be aware of some of the key risks that you will face as a result, to be able to identify them and effectively assess them for the context of your organization, as well as ultimately consider the resources you have available on hand to control those risks and review the measures that you have in place, both currently and moving forward. What measures would you need to put in place as well? So in some cases, there are more risks associated with volunteers, naturally. They can be less experienced, they can be transitory through the organization, they're less full-time, obviously, than your regular staff. As we often see volunteers put in roles doing the legwork, inherently, there are some risks that come with this. They're on the ground. They interact with our service users. So one way to mitigate the higher level of risk posed by volunteers is to have a really robust volunteer management practice. How can we ensure strong commitments from our volunteers and a good program design which eases their participation and the risks associated with it? Risk management is a pivotal part of volunteer management. It's an investment both in your organization and its services, which can help prevent the negative impacts that come as some of the risks that we face today. So we have a number of fantastic speakers that we've lined up for you today. They're here to share their experience with you, so please do listen carefully to their insights and continue to post those questions in the Q&A in the Mentimeter. Our first speakers, they come as a pair. We're going to hear from Professor Ho first, and Miss Whaley is going to join him for the panel session later. Professor Ho is a professor of accounting at SIT, and alongside his teaching, he holds a number of prominent board roles within Singapore. But crucially, he has been involved in the research to develop an enterprise risk management toolkit, which can be shared with you in his speaking today and after this event as well. So without any ado, I'm going to hand over to Professor.
Thank you very much. Let me click to share my screen as it is. Right, I'll put it into the active mode. Please bear with me. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to share with you on this the state of risk management in charities in Singapore and risk management toolkit. I work together with Thi Wei Lee from KPMG. She's my partner in crime. Since this deck of slides is available to the audience, I shall briefly cover the deck of slides to ensure that we leave good time for the rest of the speakers and also our panel discussion. Right? If I gloss over some of the matters, please pardon me. Right? So this is Thi Wei Lee's credentials. This is my credentials, which I can leave it to you for reading. Most important of all, I'm always grateful for the opportunity to give back to the charity sector by serving on various boards and committees. Today, this session will cover, firstly, a quick introduction. We look at the survey findings that we conducted last year, which the report will be published very soon, on the risk management among the charities in Singapore. Then I'll talk about the ERM, the enterprise risk management journey, and then finish with a conclusion. This is an introduction, all right? In ISO 31000, risk management. Risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So it has two pieces: the likelihood of something happening and the consequences of that event happening and its impact on the organization. Right? So this is risk, uncertainties. Risk management has everything to do with the coordinated activities to allow us to direct and to control an organization to a certain extent to neutralize the risk. That means to lessen the likelihood and to reduce or eradicate the possible consequences. And immediately you realize that not all risks can be eliminated, but they can be mitigated. And there's always the issue about effectiveness and costs. We can have an extremely safe environment, but it will be extremely costly too. We've been in this space because we're very concerned about the risk management in charities. In 2016, together with KPMG, we launched the first study to look at how risk management was being conducted by charities. And thereafter, KPMG released one of the very important enterprise risk management toolkit that has been used by charities to guide them and to start them on the journey in terms of risk management. In 2024 or last year, we decided to relook at how have we progressed since 2016. And with this, I'm going to share with you the 2024 risk management survey for charities. And then I'll briefly touch on the refreshed toolkits coming from KPMG to further augment the 2016 management toolkits. Where have we been, right? This is the current state of the risk management adoption in charities in Singapore. In 2016, we established a baseline, and we came to the conclusion on average there's only about 25% of all the charities surveyed then that has a formally defined policy and approach to manage risk within your charity. So we are very pleased to inform all of you by 2024, in our study to be released, we have doubled that formal adoption of policies and approach to manage risk. If you look at this chart, of particular importance are actually the larger charities, right? You'll find that those charities that 10 million and above in terms of gross revenue or assets, literally a large percentage of them, or 78% of them, actually have a formal documentation in the management of risks, right? So the important note here is the fact that there is progression along the way since the last study in 2016. So this is very encouraging, all right? It's giving us the same picture, but in very clear numerical numbers. Among the large charity, 92% have a formal policy, up from 51% in 2016. So literally, we are very encouraged by this in the sense that risk management is maturing. And so we want to continue to encourage charities to look into this aspect, particularly with changes in the landscape with the introduction of new genre of risks. So what we did was we also specifically break down the possible top risk category: the strategic risk, the financial risk, the operational risk, the compliance risk, and the infotech risk. So within all of these category or pillars of risk, there are subdivisions. things in which worries us. So for example, in 2024 studies as it is, we specifically introduced the digital and innovation risk as a new category. Right. So of course, there's always the issue about what about relevancy risks? Relevancy risk can be deemed as a strategic risk because an organization has to constantly reinvent its relevancy in the landscape. So these are the broad genre of risks, and let me just quickly show you the charities that we have surveyed. What are the top 5 risks, or the percentage of the participants selecting any of these categories as the top 5 risks? So in terms of strategic risks, 85% of them actually responded that succession planning and key man risk is one of their top 5 risks, right? In terms of financial risk, interestingly, 93% funding availability risk is a top concern. In terms of operational risk, talent attraction and retention risk, 83% of them express that this is one of their top risks. This is particularly the case coming out from COVID-19. Moving forward, in terms of strategic risks, 100% of all those who are surveyed has identified the regulatory compliance risk as one of the top 5 concerns. And this is not surprising because of the continuing development in terms of the regulatory environment. They're coming out with a new so-called a refreshed charity code of governance, all right? And the expectation in the landscape, right, concerning PDPA, right, and many others hygiene factors that will help the charity to be sustainable. These are the concerns of charities. And when it comes to, not the financial risk, but the cybersecurity risk, as it is, cybersecurity risk is one of the top, one of the concern, all right, 67% of them. So if you look at the selected key risks and compare that with what happens in previous years, because this is a volunteers forum as it is, I want to specifically pull out some of these top risks and put it in the framework of volunteers, right? So for example, succession planning and key man risk. What does it mean for the volunteer base? For the volunteer base, volunteer succession planning or key volunteer risk becomes an issue, right? In that sense that if your entire volunteer is led by a champion, right? And the succession of the champion can become a big issue, because if the champion is no longer around, your entire volunteer programs can collapse. Alternatively, if you wrap your entire volunteer program around one person, again, you are subjecting yourself to a key man risk. Funding availability, ensuring that the volunteer programs continue to be funded, all right? Volunteer programs should not just be a part, but it should be sustainable, should be meaningful, and should have continuity. Accounting and reporting risks, ensuring volunteer numbers and activities are appropriately reported, attributed, right? So herein also lies one of the risks that we need to think very carefully about, because the danger is that charities can over-report their numbers. And in over-reporting their numbers, you can get away with it. But at some point in time, if this is being discovered and reported, you will suffer irreparable so-called reputational risk. Because if you can fudge on the volunteers' numbers, what else are you fudging? I shall not run through all the rest of them, but I would like to specifically highlight the data confidentiality risk, which is a new risk that we really have to give it some thought. This has to do with the volunteer data or how the volunteers are using or accessing the data of the charity. So, for example, keeping volunteers' data confidential, your donation data, all right, your IC numbers of your volunteers or the address, right? Or if you allow the volunteers to be doing mailing for you or to be contacting the beneficiaries for you, how should the volunteer be handling this confidential data that's given to them? Because if you don't manage this data carefully and properly, you subject yourself to the PDPA risk. There is the PDPC will go after you for leakage of information. To make matter worse, if a volunteer is able to download your entire core of beneficiary data, and the volunteer's laptop is stolen, it will trace back to you as a charity, you see? And this is where your concern will be, because you have not kept an eye on how your volunteers actually keep your data. So I hope I'm not increasing all your stress level, but these are the new world that we live in and the dynamics of this changing landscape that we have to deal with. So we ask ourselves risk mitigations. Things will always be there. Cybersecurity will always be an issue. So when we poll the people, they say 23% of them actually has formalized policies and procedures to deal with risk. So the first starting point for charity must be, you need to be able to be aware of the risks and come up with policies to mitigate or to basically control those risks. That is the starting point. And the rest of them are all the mitigations, opportunities or tools that a charity use. Challenges in risk management. Why are charities not doing it? Lack of manpower, the lack of experience, expertise in risk management is a dominant concern. So at the charity governance level, for example, at charity council level, we are very cognizant and concerned about this. We understand that the charities are all struggling with manpower, struggling with resources. So we are here to do our very best to help the charities to manage this risk, knowing that you have a shortage of manpower, you struggle with lack of expertise or experiences. That's the reason why the toolkit was created. And we will continue to engage the charities to ensure that all of us are brought up to speed to manage our charities' risk, to ensure sustainability in the long run. So the long and short is that don't worry, you won't journey alone. We will do our very best to ensure that we protect, we enhance, we empower the charity landscape, and particularly all of you as volunteers. So these are the new areas of risk in 2024 in our studies. ESG. Does your charities have a formally defined policy approach roadmap for managing ESG and climate risk? Interestingly, 61% of the respondents say no. Right? So in that sense, this is the new genre of risk. You see, you need to understand the climate change, the environment change, right, will be a big issue in years to come as it is. And the charities needs to start on this journey. So let's give us the simplest example. If you are, as a charity, is working to save life, but yet in so doing, you are using methods that pollute the environment, immediately there's a contradiction. Right. So that contradiction will create different sets of dynamics for you as a charity. So it's important that the charity start this journey, and only 9% of charities surveyed so far has a formal documentation. A lot more work has to be done in this space. And again, we want to assure you that you won't be alone in this journey. Business continuity plan has a booster shot arising from the COVID-19. COVID-19 caused a significant mayhem to charities because suddenly all your face-to-face volunteer programs has to be shut down. All right. And literally the whole landscape changed, and we learn our lessons. So in the space of the business continuity plan, we have seen some progresses. 41% basically has said yes. All right. 25% of them say currently work in progress, and 27% say no as it is. Right. So these are statistics that we want to document as a baseline, and we'll come back to this in due time to ensure that the charities progress. But much more than that, we will provide education, training, and encouragement to allow us to journey together. We ask ourselves too, in the ESG space, what are the help and guidances that the charities need? And the top need is, how do we establish an ESG framework? So the way to interpret this question is, where do we start? How do we start? Right? So we understand the anxiety of the charities in the landscape. The charities has also said that there will be need for larger amount of training workshop relating to ESG matters. So I can only at best tell you, don't worry, akan datang. They are coming soon. All right. With respect to BCP, what are the challenges? the lack of personnel who is able to craft BCP. Maybe this is veiled actually under a more important real matter. There is actually charities do not have the resources nor the luxury to set aside individual staff to look at business continuity plan. Alternatively, even to craft a business continuity plan takes a lot of effort, takes the whole organization to come together and time spent, which most charities say we really cannot afford to do so. But the business continuity plan, if you don't have a good plan, it can jeopardize your entire operations. I remember once in a charity that set on the hospice, the construction dig and dig and dig outside on the road and broke our power line. And we were without electricity. You can imagine the medical facilities without electricity. We all panic. And we have to quickly bring in mobile generator to ensure that the facility continues. And we were hoping that the power line will be fixed within a day. Unfortunately, it took us more than a week. Right? So these are things that if you don't plan properly, actually it can be a checkmate in the operations. What we were actually sort of troubled with is that 28% of respondents say that there's no urgency to have a BCP, which is unusual arising from the COVID-19 situation, right? Don't worry again, we will have to work harder in this space to ensure that the charities are not blinded or blindsided by surprises. So with this, I'm going to say briefly about the ERM toolkit. This is a very significant toolkit actually created by KPMG in all their consulting experiences, right? Bundling together how they may be able to help charity. The 2016 toolkit is probably one of the toolkit that I recommend to any charities that ask me, how do we start the risk management framework? Because it gives you very simple and clear details and templates for charities to start this journey. We further enhance that with the 2014 toolkit, all right? And charities can look forward to, for example, the survey result that we're going to release, the toolkit, and hopefully, and not hopefully, the webinars and trainings that will be taking place as we move forward, because the health of the charities in many ways will significantly affect the welfare of our beneficiaries, right? So in this typical enterprise risk management or ERM roadmap, three things we want to do basically as a top pattern. First, we want to know what are the risks? Risk awareness, number one. And then after knowing that the risks exist, we want to know how am I going to manage those risks? What are the mitigations? What are the things that we can do? And what are things that we can try to do, but it will never go away? Cybersecurity risks will never go away as it is. You can spend whatever money you have on basic cybersecurity risks. And the only thing that will help you in cybersecurity risks is don't connect to the internet. And you know immediately that means no business tools. Right? So risk managing is a second step. And then don't forget too, if you stop there, then risk management will always be a cost. We want to go beyond that. We want to be risk enabled, meaning through the risk mitigation, we want to create values. We want to be a signal to our stakeholders that we are a hip-hop, well-prepared organization. When you donate money to us, your data will not be leaked as it is, right? Or when you give donate to us, or when you work with us as a volunteers, you will be taken care of. Insurance will be bought, and whatever. In that sense, it creates value, not just a cost in terms of risk management. And this is where we have a mature ERM. So these are the constituent pillars, the key pillars of a robust enterprise risk framework, starting from risk strategy and appetite, namely, how much risk are you willing to take, all right? What are the strategies that you need to have? Then you look at how do you govern those risks. Then you look at also the risk culture. Remember, the weakest link in any organization can jeopardize the entire organization. And we often and will always understand the reality, the weakest link is always human being. All right. Thereafter, what is the tone on the top? Where are the support? How serious are we taking the risk? And then we'll go on to risk assessment and measurement, managing your risk with insights, and then risk reporting and insights. And then at the end of the day, you need the data and technology to allow you to basically quantify, capture, measure, and analyze your risk. Remember the maxim that says, whatever is not measurable, it is very hard for you to be able to control. It's very hard for you to say we are making progress, because whatever you cannot measure, how do you know what is happening? So this is an example of key risk indicators for risk monitoring. You can think of the risk indicators or the risk monitoring dashboard as the dashboard you have in your driving. It tells you whether you have enough gas, what is the speed that you're running, what is the temperature of your engine. You remember, there are 10,001 things happening when you drive your car, but the dashboard captures the key indicators that will jeopardize your safe driving of the car. And this is exactly what we're trying to do. We are creating a key risk indicators, a dashboard that allows us to monitor what are the key things that will cause the organization to slow down. So I use this example about the KRI's report on volunteers. For example, volunteers dissatisfaction. We can look at the volunteer survey score and say that if any score is below 70, probably you'll fail, or in the red zone. That means you have to think about what is wrong in that space. And you would like to have a healthy score of above 85. Loss of volunteers. What is a volunteer turnover like in terms of percentage? What is the time to fill the volunteer vacancy? Number of donors or new donors as it is, or service quality of volunteers. Immediately you realize very clearly that any one of these key risk indicators is always charity dependent, because the charity has different types of charities, different size of charity, and different endowment in terms of resources, right? So that's the reason why when crafting an ERM or key risk indicator, it takes time, all right? It takes effort, right? And it's also a continuous learning lessons, you see, right? So the purposeful management of risk can result in value creation. What else? We try to overlap the ESG with the ERM framework, because we do not want to end up having two distinct frameworks and doing two different things, because we know for sure that the ESG will always overlap with your risks, right? So this is where we learn how to interweave those two, looking specifically at creating the common zone that allows us to measure both of them accurately, and then whatever that is unique that falls outside the overlap zone, right? So I have all those ESG consideration for you to read concerning the risk strategy and appetite using the 7 risk pillars that KPMG propose, right? And the implication it has on ESG and how we're able to do the measurement. So this is an illustrative ESG roadmap at a glance. What are we trying to do? We're trying to move from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, looking at the report, establishing an ESG task force. You need to set up people within the charity to say, we need to look at it. What data do we need to collect? What are the ESG material topics? In the charities that I set on the board, we start this process. And my management asked me, Prof, where do we start? What do we collect? What do we do? I say, you start easy, right? In carbon accounting or in carbon emission, carbon dioxide emission, actually, they're only scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Hardly anyone of us do scope 1. That is, we do the specific burning of fuels, except if you have a fleet of vehicles. All right, so that's scope 1. We don't generate electricity ourselves, right? Then the scope 2 will be electricity consumption, water consumption, waste, papers, right? So these are the simple indicators that you always have. You start out with those simple indicators. What is the total amount of water that you consume for the year? What is the total amount of electricity you consume for the year? If you have a fleet of cars, what is the total amount of gasoline that you consume a year? What is the paper wastage? Can you reduce paper using online and what have you? Yada, yada, yada. You start with the reporting, then you look at areas for you to enhance what new policies you put in place to reduce, to control, to set target, and then ultimately giving the data that you have to continuous monitor and do ESG reporting to bring you from the base state to a better state. Because remember, if you don't know where you are going, where you are doesn't really matter. But once you establish where is your base state, and then you know where you are going, you can do the measurement moving forward, right? So this is what it means. Step 1, establish a baseline. Step 2, assess current capabilities. Step 3, implement changes. And step 4, a continuous monitoring. I want to assure all of you as volunteers, it is not rocket science. It is starting the journey and making that journey to become part and parcel of our lives as it is, right? ESG should be built with the charity's existing framework, policies, and procedures. We have done this. The whole of Singapore, we have done this. We have Save the Water campaign, right? And over the years, we have cultivated this so-called behavior and practice for us to cherish and treasure every drop of water that we have, and so on and so forth, right? So the charity need to start developing practical steps, set good goals, and then measure them and report them as you move along. And this is my second last slide. So implementing a well-structured BCM, business continuity management plan, is not just a regulatory requirement. It is a commitment to the people and causes that charities serve, right? So I use the example of the hospice that we were without power, right? What if another haze struck Singapore again as it is? How would that affect healthcare charities? How would that affect your programs? We do this always for rainy day programs, rainy day plans. You see, if you look at this chart, the basic thought pattern we have is this. There must be a preparation that if something happened, what is our response? How long will it take us to recover? And then basically, how do we bring us back to business as usual? So let me give you a very simple example that will give a heart attack as it is. You discover that you have a cyber breach and you lost your entire donor database data as you do. Question, what is your plan to do recovery? What is your business continuity plan in this instance in which you have a cyber breach? And if you don't have one, and you don't even know what to do, likelihood is that you're going to drink coffee with the PDPC, because you're not only merely going to get a reprimand, you may even be fined for that matter as it is. So these are this is a very simple approach for us to deal with: prepare, response, recover, and restore. Allow me to conclude. The key takeaways are risk management practices have improved over time, and we are very grateful. But resource constraint is still an issue. We understand your struggle, and we will journey together with you. And enterprise risk management is a journey, and the charities are maturing, and we need to continue to mature to bring us to a better state, a good state to serve our stakeholders. And finally, the best way for us to do is to look at the new genre of risks, for example, the BCP, the ESG, and what may come in the future. Like, for example, AI. How would AI threaten the way we do our business as it does, right? In terms of efficiency and effectiveness, right? So going forward, to be prepared for the known unknown and the unknown unknown. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, right? I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Professor Ho. Thank you for sharing with our audience. I'd encourage our audience, please do, if you have any questions for Professor Ho, please do pop those in the Mentimeter chat. Some very valuable insights shared, and a key example that what is measured can be focused on, can be implemented, and we can take action. So some very valuable insights in terms of the key risks that you guys face in your organizations. It's great to see that the sector has actually improved since 2016, and it's kind of doubled in the number of organizations that do have established risk management policies. But we're still kind of 40 to 50% short of 100% there. So there's still a long way to go in terms of that risk management maturity and identifying some of those key risks that are relevant to you. And obviously, Professor Ho has drawn some of those key risks out there around succession planning and key man risk. Some of the funding constraints and concerns moving forward, some of the data confidentiality, which is really emerging in the sector. As Professor Ho said, our world is evolving and changing all the time. So we have to be up to speed with the risks that we face that are specific for our organization. Yes, there are some general ones out there in the data confidentiality, in the ESG, in the business continuity planning. So we need to be aware of the key risks that our organization is going to face, but we also need to distill those down into the key steps that we can take specific to our organization to start addressing, assessing, and then addressing some of those risks that we may face. So thank you very much, Professor Ho, for your sharing there. Do please feel free to put comments in the Mentimeter for Professor Ho and our other speakers. But without any ado, I will introduce our next speaker. Mr. Melvin is a senior lecturer in law at SUSS.
Cannot call SPT. Do we have that relationship then?
Sorry for that. Yes, I'll introduce Melvin. Yes, a senior lecturer in law at SUSS. He's a counsel at Peter Lowe Chambers as well, where through Bono SG, he does a number of community and charity programs working in the sector. So he'll be able to give us a bit more of a deep dive into the legal risks associated with volunteers and volunteer management. So over to you, Melvin.
Thank you, Chris. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay, cool. Right, so, well, thank you everyone for your attention so far. So right now, what we're going to be doing is that I'm going to be talking to you about legal risk management. And essentially what it is, we're talking about some of the things that you should be hopefully more aware of when it comes to dealing with your volunteers and your organization as a whole. So it's been very helpful for Professor Ho to go first, because he's actually laid out the specifics as to what organizations and the managers need to look out for. I'm going to be talking a bit more on the macro level in terms of the general concerns and the general flags that you should be looking at. So in essence, today I'll be talking to you about three things. The primary focus will be on the first two portions, that of the different forms of legal liability, and the next one being that of how do we deal with such risk management, and what are the possible best practices you can think about. Okay. So in general, just for today's purposes, I have it in terms of three main areas: that of criminal or regulatory, and that of civil and statutory torts. And if you're wondering about the jargon, don't worry, I'm about to get into it. So first, criminal, right? Criminal liability, obviously, it's something that's illegal, it's against the law. So essentially, it's offenses that have been created by virtue of legislation, for instance, and there are consequences which follow, right? And punishment that we would be accustomed with hearing about, for instance, through the news and whatnot, have to do with fines, imprisonment, so on and so forth. There is the other aspect that is not spoken about too often, but in recent years, it's something that's come more into focus, which is how do you hold an entity liable, meaning like a company, meaning like an organization? Because obviously, if you think about it, you can't throw an organization in jail, right? You can fine an organization, you can throw the, for example, the key personnel being the CEO or the particular director in jail, but you can't actually throw the entire company in jail, right? So there has been some movement and there's been some provision in the law to do with corporate responsibility and liability. One of the key concepts that has been raised, and you may or may not be familiar with this, but for your knowledge, it's called a deferred prosecution agreement. Essentially is whereby the company is found to have done something wrong that's against the law, and the Attorney General's Chambers in Singapore, which is the organization that prosecutes, that takes on criminal offenses, may enter into some sort of arrangement with the entity so as to deal with its wrongdoing. Okay, it's not spoken about because such arrangements are actually held confidentially, but it is for your awareness, especially at your level, in terms of managing volunteers and as well as running organizations, to know that a liability can still be held on a company. The next one I'll talk about is that of regulatory liability. Essentially, what it is that whenever you're dealing with a particular legislation, right, and they set out certain requirements. For instance, the one that I've raised here is that of the Charities Act. So under the Charities Act, yes, it talks about how to run an organization, which is a charity, but they also speak about certain offenses that will come about if you don't follow the stipulation. So for instance, there is a duty to maintain proper accounting records. So if you don't do so, it will attract particular sanctions, penalties. There's also offenses such as supplying false or misleading statements to the Commissioner of Charities, right, as well as breach of regulation in relation to donations or use of donations. So the key thing to realize here is that whenever you have a piece of legislation or a law that gives power for the creation of, for instance, a charity or an organization, or for you to do your role, contrastingly, that piece of legislation usually will have provisions which says that if you don't do your role well, there are penalties involved. Okay, so I think it is important to appreciate, especially when all of you are dealing with your volunteers, that that awareness is there as well. That just because we set out in the right spirit, for instance, to help other people or help particular causes, it doesn't absolve us of a liability as a whole if we don't do our jobs properly. So the next one has to do with the PDPA, or the Personal Data Protection Act 2012. And Prof. Ho actually did mention this earlier, right? Because in Singapore today, in terms of the use or the access to data, the law has evolved to a state right now whereby because of this particular act, organizations have a duty to protect personal data. Okay, so they have to make reasonable security arrangements. And just a bit more info about the PDPA, you actually do have to appoint a data protection officer as well for every organization to ensure that the not only are the arrangements made in place, but also to deal with any form of breach. Okay, so when we're talking about risk management, we're not only talking about preventing something from happening. The mindset also has to be about what happens and what do we do when the breach happens. So in the context of the PDPA, there are certain obligations. I won't go into the detail of it all, but just very generally, there are obligations upon the organization whereby there is a data breach as to a timeline that they have to inform the authorities as well as the affected customers. So if you recall in the past, for instance, whereby data was leaked by and I would say hacked, if you will, you would have received, unfortunately, notification from organizations telling you that your data has been accessed, and sometimes one of the immediate things they do in their protocol is to inform customers to change their passwords, right? So those are the things that basically, or the obligations, excuse me, that the PDPA sets out, as well as the, I would say, the reasonable security arrangements through the data protection officer that an organization is supposed to have. These are the things that they need to have in place to make sure that if there is any issue that happens, they will take the steps accordingly to effectively mitigate, effectively limit the harm and the damage that's caused. And you also see that the PDPC, which is basically the Personal Data Protection Commission, right, may issue directions, including to pay financial penalties, not exceeding $1 million, right? It can also lead to private action for loss or damage resulting from the breach of provisions. So essentially, if I may just build on this or expound on this slightly, it means that if you don't adhere by your obligations in terms of keeping data secure, it is also possible that the affected individuals can commence legal action against you in breach of your duties beyond the data commission essentially issuing a fine on you. Okay. So also note that specifically because we're talking about charities, we're talking about volunteer organizations, donor information is to be kept confidential under regulations as well, right? So be aware of not only the powers that I mentioned earlier that you are given, the responsibilities that you're given, but also understand that there will be knock-on consequences if things are not done accordingly, or your roles are not done up to a particular sufficient level. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is that of civil liability. So earlier we had criminal, whereby you're in a breach of the law. Basically, you can attract fines or imprisonment, which are criminal sanctions. You have civil liability, which is basically it's sort of like, if you think about it, it's kind of like contractual, it's private action, breaches and cause of actions. So we're talking about contractual. We're saying that, for instance, someone has entered into an agreement, you and yourself or the organization has entered into an agreement with another party. And when you're entering into agreement, any contract, one of the fundamental things in a contract is basically there has to be that meeting of minds, meaning that both of you understand, both parties understand what you're going to be doing, right? So, and by that nature, you have obligations, right? So if you breach those obligations, then obviously the party that has been harmed, who didn't do anything wrong, can actually sue you. That's contractual. Okay, so tortious is basically what we call a common law realm or cause of action. So tort basically is this: it's saying that you shouldn't be doing something to harm the other person. So a very accessible way of understanding tort is, for instance, a duty of care, which you may have read, for instance, in the press when they talk about negligence, right? Should have behaved in a particular way, should have behaved better, did not meet that standard, and therefore was negligent, did not meet duty of care. So that's tortious, right? So when we say that someone can commence a civil action against you for tort, basically they'll be saying, in that example of duty of care, they'll be saying that you should have taken more care when you handled my particular matter, and you didn't. So you fell below the standard of what is reasonably expected, and therefore I'm suing you for the harm that's been caused to me, right? And if we were to extend it further, it could be that the harm that was caused to this person, there are lasting effects, right? So they may claim for particular future losses, so on and so forth. Okay. So in terms of civil liability, what I just spoke about, when we talk about remedies, we talk about how to fix such situations. Usually if it's like some sort of contractual breach, right, whereby you were supposed to deliver a particular project, or you're supposed to do something as per the contract and you didn't do so, therefore you caused a loss to me. So very often the party that's been harmed will sue for damages or money, essentially, to say that, because you've harmed me, therefore you need to pay me not only the value of the contract, but for instance, if I had to go and spend more money. So for instance, if you had engaged a contractor and then because of your breach, for example, it involves a contractual work and the contractor didn't perform his or her duty, you have to go outside and get another contractor. So that additional money spent getting that contractor to fix whatever the previous one did, that can be rolled in terms of monetary compensation as well, and damages. It'll be added up to the sum that you're claiming. Okay. Another kind of remedy that can be sought after is that of injunctions. An injunction essentially is to stop someone from doing something, right? So, for instance, if we're saying that there has been some sort of I would say infringement or some sort of breach of I would say, in the context of dealing with individuals, sometimes someone has a protection order, for instance, and that's been breached, right? So then an injunction will be in place, for instance, to keep that person from accessing or coming near the individual again, right? So there are all these different examples in terms of the remedies at play, and these are just examples because there can be more. There's one more that I will tell you about. It's called specific performance. So specific performance is basically we entered into a contract together. You didn't do your role, right? And it ended up causing me a lot of harm. I may go to court requesting for specific performance, meaning that I want you to specifically do something in order to fix my situation. Okay, so that's another example of a kind of solution that may come about. Now, you might be thinking and you might be asking, so what do I do, right? As a volunteer manager or as a person in a managerial position in dealing with or being aware of all these risks, what can I do to try and mitigate these potential legal risks, right? So the first thing I will say, right, before I get into the specifics, even though we're on the slides here about, terms and conditions and whatnot, is this: if you have the ability to, or you have the opportunity to, especially in the infancy of your organization or on the setup of your particular role, if you can, you should seek legal advice to make sure that everything's in order, right? Because that will lend itself to everything that I'm talking about here, right? So for instance, when we're talking about terms and conditions, right, whereby, what is the code of conduct that you have for your volunteers, right? What is the extent, the mandate, or the authority in which your volunteers can represent themselves? So all these things are actually to do with the wording, right? That, for instance, you will be asking your volunteer to be aware of, right? If you have proper legal advice from the start, right, and you can work out and hammer out those wording in the beginning, that can be quite clear to everyone as to what their role is, what is the extent of their authority, and anything beyond their authority, they are acting what we call at law ultra vires, meaning they're acting outside of their scope, and therefore it's on them, it's not on you as an organization. Okay, so you may want to think about having that particular aspect of things done. I mean, the other thing to also think about is that it's not only about protecting yourself and your organization as a whole, it's about protecting your volunteers as well, right? Because in their role, when volunteers carry out their duties and whatnot, by the very nature of their work, you don't want them to be harassed. You don't want them to basically get into trouble if they are just trying to highlight something that's not gone well. So these policies that we speak about, the wording of such documents, the extent of the authority, if you will, all of these things should be hammered out at the early onset, okay? And through, I would say, with legal advice as well. The one thing I will say is that you may be thinking at the back of your mind, and it's good if you already are thinking about such things, as to, whether it's the costs, the excess and whatnot. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Pro Bono SG, whereby myself and the firm, we volunteer. There are schemes in which Pro Bono SG helps charities in terms of sorting out the documentation, as well as, for instance, having legal clinics to just deal with issues that come about. Okay, so there is that avenue, there is that option to go speak with someone if need be. Okay, just so you know. Now, the other things that I want to highlight, for instance, you may be thinking about how do you mitigate against, loss of items or personal injury that's suffered in the premises or your activities that you conduct. Okay. Now, some of us may have seen, signs that are put up saying that, if you come here and you get injured in this activity, it's all on you, right? It's nothing to do with the organization or the landlord, if you will. I'm here to burst that bubble, or to maybe have some of you go, oh, I was right all along. Under Singapore law, that you cannot essentially contract away your own liability for negligence or personal injury, right? Basically, not to be too technical about it, but we have laws, for instance, Unfair Contract Terms Act, which basically says that if it's due to your own negligence, you cannot, by way of contract, having someone sign off on it, say that you are not liable. Okay, so you have to be aware as to the extent in which you can exclude liability, right? Because the truth of the matter is that if someone, for example, your volunteer is in the midst of carrying out his or her duty as per the role that you've prescribed and mandated in your code of conduct, and he or she gets injured, right, in that sense, right, it's not so simple to simply just say that you're not liable, right? Because they weren't doing anything above and beyond what they were supposed to do anyway. So you do have to bear that in mind. And the other question that I want you to have, apart from being aware, thinking about how we can prevent this, the other question that you should be having by now is thinking, what do I do when these things happen, right? Because it's important from a legal perspective. We're always thinking about preventing, but we're also thinking about what happens during, and we're also thinking about what happens after. So it's important in terms of carrying out your role and being able to have a firm grip and control over the situation. These questions need to be percolating in your mind, and especially the one that I just mentioned, which is, so what happens if there's some sort of dispute, there's some sort of disagreement as to, what happened and who's at fault, if you will. Okay, so you can put up your signs, you can put up your policies, right? And they apply and they will help you to what we call basically a reasonable extent. But remember, you cannot fully push away all liability in terms of personal injury, in terms of negligence, okay? In terms of if it's really like your staff or maybe your organization didn't have basically a reasonable steps or reasonable care towards the individuals involved, okay? So that's important for you to understand. Yeah, so I think the comic proves my point. The next thing that I want to talk about, just to round this off, okay, is to do with the final question that I mentioned, right? So what happens when all these things blow up, right? So you have to consider and be aware that if you're trying to close off the matter, let's say you're writing, okay, and it's in letter form, it's in email form, if you will, right? There is this term called without prejudice. So I'm not sure whether many of you are familiar with this, but if you are, please bear with me. So very simply, without prejudice basically means that whatever we talk about, we won't use later in a court of law. Okay, so the idea is that if you're working some sort of agreement out, and the assumption is completely legal, because if it's illegal, without prejudice doesn't help you, right? So you want to do so on a without prejudice perspective. Very often, I would say, just as a matter of prudence, if it reaches the stage where things have blown up and there's a possibility that lawsuits might be involved or further action might be spoken about, you may want to actually speak to a legally trained person to just make sure that your blind spots are covered. Okay, so be aware of time and claim limitations. Okay, so in Singapore, there are what we call time limitations on claims, right? So it depends on when the matter starts from and when somebody decides to claim you from. Let me rephrase that. It depends on when the incident happened and when the person decides to sue you. There's a couple of years that the person has before he can decide to sue you or not. Okay, so it's important for you to understand what's happening. If you're not sure, seek legal advice, right? And also to manage the process as a whole. When we say manage the process, I don't mean manage just the individual. It's managing everybody involved. So whether it's your stakeholders, the party that maybe was harmed, and maybe even your own legal team, if you will. You do need to have a firm control on everything. Because as volunteer managers, we understand that we operate on a budget. And of course, you don't want your funds to be wholly exhausted on legal fees alone. Okay? Now, I just wanted to round off with this, okay? Basically, when we speak about going to court, we're talking about litigation. Basically, it's the court who a judge will hear evidence and will determine who's right and who's wrong. Okay, that's a very general way of understanding this. Okay, sometimes depending on the way in which your own terms and conditions and your own contract policies, if you will, are drafted, you may actually say that if disputes arise, we'll go to arbitration. Okay, and arbitration basically is a process where an arbitrator will decide who's right and who's wrong, and both sides are usually represented by counsel as well. Okay, so that's generally how dispute resolutions go, but it's important for you to understand that in today's day and age, it is very important that whatever legal document you have, right, with the parties involved, all your stakeholders, there should be a dispute resolution clause. A dispute resolution clause basically says if there's any disagreement, if there's anything to be worked out between all of us who sign documents, what will we do? So in today's day and age, it is very common to have a multi-tiered dispute resolution clause, meaning if we have a disagreement, we go for mediation first, for example, with the Singapore Mediation Center, or with for example, the Law Society Mediation Scheme, right? And if that fails, we will go for arbitration. And if arbitration fails, we will go to court, for instance. And then it's any permutation and any combination. Usually there is a dispute resolution clause just for everybody's information because it saves time and it saves money for everybody, right? Because the clause is a contractual term. As long as parties sign on to it, it means they agree that if they are fighting over something in relation to the contract or the particular legal agreement they entered into, they will go for this scheme, whether it's mediation or arbitration. The entire process is confidential, it's without prejudice, which means it allows everybody to save face as well, which could be very important in a volunteer context. Okay, right. So that's all I have. My next slides are on questions and whatnot, but I understand that we're doing it later. So I will just stop my share now.
Thank you very much, Melvin. Thank you,
Thank you.
to our second speaker. Obviously, some very valuable insights there from the perspective of the legal profession. See, we've heard from Professor Ho in identifying some of those key risk areas around operations, financial and data, and some key links there to what Melvin was sharing around the repercussions that if we don't address some of those risk areas. So we do need to identify the risk, which obviously Professor Ho has shown us the data behind, but we actually need to consider the consequences if we don't address some of these areas, and what are some of the steps that we can do? How do we mitigate? I like what Melvin shared there around the people element, that actually we can start to take some steps. We do need to consider the policies that we have in place. Is everybody aware? Do we have the codes of conduct, which not only inform our staff, but also protect our volunteers as we manage them as well? So we have the codes of conduct, we have the anti-harassment, the whistleblowing policies. Do your organizations have these? And what are some of the steps that you can take to start integrating those into your organization? You are liable for the people you serve and for the people that work with you. So thank you very much, Melvin, for bringing that perspective to our participants. Please do continue to add your questions in if they're specific to the legal profession. If you're like me and you're not a legal expert, if there's anything else you'd like to know, please do pop those in. So thank you very much. We're going to take a short 5-minute break now. Please do keep yourself signed into the Zoom call. The QR code is there to continue adding your questions into the Q&A, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes time at 3:43. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully we've got everybody back from the short break. Hopefully you managed to get a drink, stretch your legs, recharge a little bit, ready for the second half of today's session. Given that you have hopefully been a little bit recharged, we're going to do something slightly different now. We normally like to get our participants involved when we do these volunteer management sessions. So today's activity, we're going to be giving you a bit of a hands-on experience applying yourself to risk analysis for a particular scenario. So we're going to use Mentimeter again. We're going to collect your responses to some questions that we pose you. So we're just going to transition into the Mentimeter slides. If you could scan the QR code or click on the link to participate, I'll give you just a second or so to get connected there. If you could get yourselves connected to the Mentimeter, for those of you that might be a little bit more delayed from your break, you can find the Menti link in the chat box. Please do scan that. Now, oh, some of you have started already. Now, we're going to give you the option of which scenario you would like to focus on today in the activity. We've got 4 here for you. One is around medical escorting to a senior, injury risk to the service users. One is around food distribution to low-income families and the leak of personal data of family members. One is around youth at risk and knowledge of criminal activities coming through the service users. And the final one is around a day activity centre for special needs children and the injury risk that that presents to the service users. And we're getting some votes coming in now, so thank you very much for that. I'll just give everybody else a few seconds or so just to catch themselves up, pop in their vote. Maybe you're taking a bit of deliberation time, no problem at all. We seem to have 2 front runners here in scenario 1 and scenario 2. Which one's going to pip it? I see a lot of our responses coming in. So would you rather focus on the medical escort to a senior and the possible injury risk, or would you rather focus on the possible leak of personal data in the context of a food distributor to low-income families? Or we're going to get one that splits the difference. We'll give you just the last few seconds, and then we will jump into our activity. Okay, we'll make the call with scenario 2. That looks, oh, although scenario 1 is just caught up. We will take scenario 2, which looks like it's gained a narrow lead. We'll progress with scenario 2 for you. Now, the scenario and the background information will be shared in the chat box. Thank you very much, Julius, who just shared that scenario with you. So we'd like you just to take a little bit of time and consider the scenario that you're in. Okay. So an SSA has a program for volunteers to support their operations and handling administrative duties in the SSA. So one of the volunteers, Alex, in one of his shifts, unintentionally stumbles across some documents which contain confidential data about the families that the SSA serves in these low-income families. Okay, so the data is revealed to Alex on his shift. It contains the sensitive details such as the names, addresses, and contact numbers of the families that the SSA serve. Alex has been involved with this program for a while now, and as a result, he's familiar with some of the family members, and he's taken a bit of an interest in connecting with one of them a little bit more. So pretending to represent the SSA, Alex has initiated contact with that family member with the intention of forming a personal relationship. Now, what we would like you to consider, as you see on the screen here, is what is the risk from this scenario for the SSA? Okay. So you'll see along the top axis, we've got the impact. How severe would the outcome be if this risk occurred? If this did occur, how severe an impact do you feel the outcome would be? And then on the other axis, you'll see the probability. What is the probability this risk will happen within the SSA? Okay. So we would like you to use the annotation tool to click and drop your pin on the grid where you would rate this risk. Your annotations won't show up on the screen, okay? Not just yet. You should be able to see them on your own screen. We'll give you a few seconds and then we'll show some of the results. So do think, what's the impact if this risk occurs? Perhaps put yourself in the shoes. Is this likely to occur in your SSA? Is there a risk of data breach, of confidential information from family members being revealed to some of the volunteers? What's the probability of this occurring? And how severe would the impact be if it did occur? Pop your annotations in, and shortly we'll show you the results. Do you feel that it's low risk or very low? Are we looking at the left-hand side, the green? And here our results come in. Okay, so we've got a bit of a spread. Some people dealing it a little bit of a lower risk. We've got a bit of a cluster in the medium to high, our orange. So we've got a spread of our results. We've got quite a few people coming in as it might be a bit of a severe impact and it's quite likely to occur. Remember, this is specific. We each face different contexts in our SSAs or in our organizations. But we do seem to be getting a little bit of a cluster towards the top right-hand side of our risk grid here. I'll just give you a little bit longer for those that might still be considering the impact and the probability of this risk. Do pop your annotation in. While you consider the risk from this scenario, I would like you to pop into the chat box on the Zoom function. I would like you to pop your reasoning for giving this rating. And I'd like you to do it in one short sentence, starting with the color with which you have rated it. So for example, if you deemed it very low, green, followed by a very short sentence or summary as to why you feel you've rated the risk this way. Now remember, the risks are contextual. There are different perspectives. So please do share your reasoning. We'd love to hear why you feel you've rated the risk this way. Risk is very contextual and is different for different organizations. So please pop into the Zoom chat box. Your reason. I give you an example here. Okay. Thank you very much. They've started to come in. Okay, please do try to include the color so we know how you've rated the risk. Confidential documents not being kept safely. Absolutely. There is a risk associated with that. We need to be careful about who has access to our documents. Data breaches under PDPA. Yes, we've heard both of our speakers so far talk about the importance of data and confidentiality. There's absolutely a risk that we should take seriously. We've got some consistency here. No proper bookkeeping. If you could help us understand, just thank you, Kristen, for including your color. Okay, yes, we've got in here distrust from the family and other beneficiaries. So we inadvertently have a consequential risk here, which is the reputational risk of the SSA as well. So we're considering the risk to the service users, but also the wider community as well. Okay, we've got some saying that our volunteers don't have access to the confidential data. Obviously a very good policy very good approach to take. Lots of consistencies here with the red. Okay. I think there's a lot of strong consistency with the severity of a data breach. Okay. Of course, contextually, this is different for different organizations as to whether you feel this is likely to occur, given your current approach to handling data and information. Now, if we could just remove the annotations for us, we'll move on to the next question that we've got for you here. There's a strong trend towards the right-hand corner there, which suggests we obviously have to be aware of how we're managing data and the implications that if we don't have that under correct lock and key. So our question for you here is, how would you, as a VMP, respond to the incident in the scenario? Put yourself in the shoes. Your SSA has had a data breach. One of your volunteers has contacted a family member of a service user. How would you, as a VMP, respond to this incident? Please put your answers in the Mentimeter. I think we can agree that this is a scenario which could and is highly likely to occur at times if we don't tighten up our data protection policies. If we don't have robust measures in place, some of our data may be available to our volunteers. How would you, as a VMP, respond to this risk? Thank you. We've got a response in. Speak to the volunteer. Clearly define what can and cannot be done. Seek clarification with them. Yeah, engage the volunteer in a conversation, find out the nature of the occurrence, what has happened, report to senior management, possibly suspend the volunteer if the expectations have been made clear to the volunteer prior. We've got some comments in the Zoom chat. If we could ask you just put them in the Menti and we have them in one place, that would be fantastic. Thank you. But yeah, we've got engaging the volunteer to understand what has happened, police report, informing the owners of the data of the breach. Yes, there is a key consideration for the individuals whose data has been linked. As Melvin just discussed, the repercussions for when data is released and how that is handled. Okay, we've started to move into how you would then handle the data moving forward. Transfer the data to a secure folder, inform the volunteer about their actions, remove the volunteer, report the incident to senior management. Okay, there's a lot of consistency here coming in dealing with the volunteer, engaging the volunteer in the process, finding out what's happened, maybe some of the intent. You will also want to understand how some of the data became available in the first place, not just the actions of the volunteer as a result of it. So really getting to the crux of the issue, which is how did the data leak occur in the first place? And then, of course, there's the issue of dealing with the volunteer themselves. There's addressing the conversation. Have you made the expectations clear to the volunteer? Was that made clear prior, or does it now need to be made clear to your volunteer base? Do you need to do any further investigating in terms of the impact on the service user and the families themselves? Has there been any other data that's been leaked, not just to this volunteer, but is this perhaps a wider issue that needs to be identified and addressed? Okay, so we've got a lot of consistency there. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move you on to the final question that we have for you around this risk. So having now acted on this risk and taken some of the steps that we've just mentioned, how would you as a VMP now play a role in mitigating or preventing this risk from occurring in the future? What are some of the steps that you can actively take as an individual to contribute to your organization, preventing this from occurring in future? We'll give you a second to type and catch yourself up, because we all need to be considerate that while risk management may be seen as a big topic and something for our senior managers within an organization to address, how do we as volunteer managers play a role in shaping how we deal with risk within our organizations? Okay, so we've got some coming in here. So have a proper checklist, reviewing the existing SOPs. Do we need to create one in the first place? Do we need to create that checklist? Do we actually need to amend what we already have? Has the system that we put in place broken down? Clearly, there's something that's obviously missing given the leak of the data in the initial instance. So we've got measures here to address how we actually manage the data, the SOPs, rethinking our processes, having some of those discussions internally, both with our management team, our full-time staff, but also our volunteers. I see there that we've got have conversations with the volunteers. Okay, maybe some of your expectations need to be reinforced, or maybe we need some new expectations moving forward. We can't ever prevent every risk from ever arising. What we can do is we can do everything we can to mitigate and prevent it in the future. If we do have a risk, how do we put our best foot forward to now mitigate occurring again? So yes, we've got a lot of consistency here with reviewing our policies. Thank you very much. Confidentiality of engagement. Okay, so we've got a two-pronged approach here. We've got the data approach, the SOPs, how do we manage our documents and our data, and then the expectations of our volunteers. Proper screening of volunteers, I see coming through there. Ensuring there's no conflict of interest. Absolutely. I think we'd agree that while resourcing is a challenge for a lot of SSAs, it needs to be a robust process of screening our volunteers, ensuring that we have the right staff on board.
Nurses at Com Cafe upstairs, level 10.
Okay, so there's a number of things here that have been highlighted that you as volunteer managers, you as managers yourselves, can now start to take steps to actively influence your organization's risk management policy. Okay. Thank you very much for providing your inputs. I know it's not easy to switch out of listening to speakers to suddenly engaging and having a few more creative thoughts of your own to apply these to real-time situations. But what we want to get home here is that these risks are contextual to different organizations. Some of you may be more likely to face a risk than another. But we always have to be aware of how likely is this risk to occur. Once we've identified what the potential risks are, and we've heard from our speakers already in terms of some of these key areas that we need to be aware, we need to be thinking and focusing on. Once we've identified those risks, how likely are they to occur? What do we need to do now to prevent that from occurring? What can we as volunteer managers do, and how can we play a role within our wider organization? You may not be able to individually take action yourselves, but can you elevate awareness? Can you bring other people into the conversation? Can you organize an effective, a task force, as we heard from our speakers earlier, to deal with some of these risks? So thank you very much for participating in the interactive activity. Really appreciate your inputs, and hopefully you've seen the risk analysis. It can be done, and it can be done at all levels of the organization. So what are the simple things that you need to be aware of? And what are the simple steps that you can start taking in order to implement effective risk management within your organizations? We all have a role to play. So with that in mind, we're shortly going to hear from an SSA member themselves with a bit of practical knowledge, a bit of experience in the sector. Mr. Jeffrey is going to be our third speaker. Oh, I'm very sorry. I've jumped the gun. We're actually going to have a group photo with you. Okay, I'm too eager, too excited. So before we hear from Jeffrey, there we go, giving Jeffrey a big build up. Before we hear from Jeffrey, we'd love to take a group photo with everybody in attendance today. Now, there are a number of you, which is excellent to see so many of you having joined us. We'd love you to turn on your cameras, okay? Much like mine is now. We'd love to see as many faces as we can on the screen. My colleague Adam is going to take a number of photos of us. Make sure you've got your biggest smiles on. You've adjusted your hair. We'd love to see your faces. If you've got virtual backgrounds on, bring yourself a little bit forward so we can see you, okay? You can strike a pose, you can strike a smile, you can give us a thumbs up, you can give us a V for victory, as my colleague Andrew is showing you on the screen itself. So we just love you to hold your pose. I appreciate it's a slightly longer for you than you would ever pose for a normal photo, but with 300 plus of you to scroll through on the screen, we've got many different screenshots that we need to take and get your happy smiling faces in the shot. It's Wednesday afternoon. It's past midday. You're over halfway through your working week. If that doesn't make you smile, maybe you need to wait for Friday evening. It's great that we've got over 300 of you here today. This tests the skills of our digital team.
Okay, yes, you're done. Thank you for your posing.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. I know that is probably longer than you'd ever hold for an individual photo. But yes, I've given him a rather large build-up now. Mistakenly introducing you, Jeff. But our next speaker comes from an SSA himself. He's a volunteer manager. He worked with Samaritans of Singapore, and he'll be bringing his experiences direct from the SSA to you. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Chris. Actually, I was having fun from the activities. I didn't know that my turn is next. Okay, but thank you so much. Let me share my slide first. Give me a minute. Okay. Finding my slide. Okay. But before that, maybe a little bit introduction of myself. So I'm Jeff from the volunteer management team. So it's really an honor to be able to share with fellow VM practitioners on risk management. So what to SOS do, how do we start, how do we adopt the ERM framework, from identifying to reviewing of the risk, what challenges that we have faced through this process, and what values that we see in this exercise. Okay. Okay, share my screen. Hopefully all of you can see. Okay, give me a second. Can everyone see? Okay, okay.
Yeah, I can see. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So we are new in this area as well. So we just started risk management process in 2021. So according to the maturity level from the pre-event survey, right? So SOS falls under repeated, between repeated and managed. Yeah, so it's mainly operational. I'll share whatever we have, what we have implemented to all of you. Hopefully it's helpful. Okay. Before we move on to the main subject, let me just give you a bit background on SOS. We are established in 1969, so which makes us 55 years old this year. So we're celebrating our 55th anniversary. We are dedicated to providing confidential emotional support, thank you, to individuals facing a crisis, thinking about suicide or affected by suicide. So our mission is to be the available lifeline to anyone in crisis. Holistic view on SOS services. So 3 focus areas: prevention, intervention, and post-actions. What are the initiatives for preventions? We have our Be a Samaritan programs. So it's a training program where we equip individuals, the skill sets and confidence level to become the first responders to support person in distress. Okay, I highlight Be a Samaritan program over here because this is one of our measures to mitigate one of the risks. Okay, so apart from the surveillance programs, of course, we do have outreach and research as well. Second column, suicide interventions. What are the initiatives that we do to support person in distress? Apart from our long-standing 24 hours hotline, as well as CareText, we do have cameos, we do have counseling services, as well as Light in the Dark. Light in the Dark is a support group for suicide attempters. And apart from person in distress, we do need to take care of our suicide survivor as well. In this context, it refers to individuals whose loved one died by suicide. So for this particular group, we do have some post-pension initiative, which include Healing Bridge and Healing Within, which is a support group, as well as our ISOS Lost Day. It's a one-day sessions where we will invite suicide survivors to come together, share their thoughts, and support each other. Okay. A little bit on volunteers. So we have two types of volunteers, similar to other SSA, service-based and skill-based. Service-based refers to volunteers who actually man our core services, which include the hotline as well as the CareText. Skill-based refers to volunteers that we recruited to support us in a more strategic level, so in committees and task force. So altogether, we have around 400 volunteers for now. Okay. I'll cover a bit on service-based volunteer because the risk management that I'm covering later is focusing on our core services. So what do SOS service-based volunteers do? They man our 24 hours hotline in CareText, engage in active listening. So they provide emotional support through empathizing, as well as asking questions and explore options and consequences. So in SOS, volunteers don't give advice, they don't share their own experience. Volunteers will also be trained how to assess suicide risk. Okay, enough of the background. I'll go into the main subject topic, which is risk management. So I saw from the pre-event survey, right, that 47% of the respondents recognized the need for risk management, but not sure how to proceed. Actually, 2 years ago, we are like that. We know the importance of risk management, but we don't know what to do and how to start. So as I mentioned earlier, SOS recruit skill-based volunteer to join committees to support SOS services. So one of the committees is our audit and risk committees. So we formed the audit and risk committees to support the team in reviewing governance, as well as providing oversight on the company's financial and audit processes, which actually include risk management. Okay, so we begin the process of risk management, right, through adopting the ERM framework, which Prof Ho has mentioned earlier. So the objective, of course, is to establish and maintain good governance. Apart from that, actually better identifications of opportunity and threats, which I will cover it later. And also, most importantly, improve preparedness and resilience to unexpected events, get us better prepared, for instance, like situation like the pandemic. Okay, so what is the ERM process about? So on this framework, 4 steps framework, from identifying risk to assessing and prioritizing, then to think of measures to mitigate, and after that to review, monitor, and of course to report. Okay, so the VM begin the process by pinpointing risks, that could influence SOS strategic goals, especially in VM area. So we start by identifying, here are the risks that we have identified. So as many as we can know, we actually identify so many, which I think most of the VM practitioners, some will agree that all these are risks. Not enough volunteers, mismatch of roles, volunteers feeling unappreciated, volunteers feeling drained, insufficient feedback channels, and inconsistency understanding. So after identifying all the risks, right, of course, the next step is to involve in assessing and prioritizing. So for us, we used the formula as well, which is the likelihood versus impact. Likelihood refers to the probabilities of occurrence. So is it extremely unlikely it will occur, or extremely likely it will occur? Versus impact. Impact assess the potential consequences of a risk, regardless if it's operational, strategic, or financial aspect. So graded from low to very high. So following this framework, right, we pinpoint two key risks in SOS. First of all, inadequate volunteers. What happens? There's not enough volunteers. If we don't have enough volunteers, it will pose a strategic risk that our operations will not be running, which also means that we may face issues of funding availabilities because we need to employ staff to cover the core services, which may impose financial risk as well. Second key risk that we have identified is volunteer turnover. Volunteer turnover, in a way, if let's say we do not have volunteers actually leave the organizations, it will impose operational risk as well. Actually, they are interrelated. Volunteer turnover means that we don't have enough volunteers. Yeah, so we actually identify these two areas as two key risks. Of course, in every key risk, there will be individual risks as well. To better understanding our framework, right? So I actually kind of categorize into 3 M's. Under insufficient volunteers, misalignment. What are the individual risks under misalignment? Not enough volunteers means I will have the risk of not enough overnighters to help us cover the overnight shift, which is very important because overnight is usually our peak hours. Okay, so that's one risk. And also recruit volunteers of different intentions, which sometimes it do happen. So we do experience volunteers MIA after completing training, which leads to low returns after we invest resources in the training process. Okay, so these are individual risks under misalignment. Under volunteer turnover, one of the categories is miscommunications. So miscommunications if let's say message is not sent crystal clear, right? This may lead to volunteers having misunderstanding. So volunteers will actually end up breaking some important rules. Okay, take for instance, policy breaches like violating the anonymities of the volunteering role or the code of conduct. For SOS, if let's say you are hotline or CareText volunteers, there's a need to remain anonymous because you can't disclose your identity. Yeah, so this message has to be conveyed very clearly. We actually include the breach of policy in because although extremely unlikely it will happen, but it will have a very severe impact to the strategic plans of SOS. Okay, volunteers having different expectations is also one of the risks, especially if let's say volunteers having the misconceptions that they can actually share their own experience and give advice to the client. Okay, if let's say volunteers feeling unheard, they may feel that they are not appreciated as well, and this can lead to volunteer turnover. So this is one of the risks under miscommunications we have identified as well. Misfit. Okay, for this misfit is particularly relevant when volunteers are actively engaged in their role. Actually, there is an inherent risk of volunteers experiencing burnout and feeling overwhelmed, especially when their role is to deal with crises and challenging clients. Negative thoughts can actually arise. So once, let's say they are not in the right frame of mind, it will lead to inconsistent service delivery. Okay, so if let's say we experience an inconsistent service delivery, receive feedback from clients, which may incur potential reputational risks for the organizations. Yeah, so this is all the risks that we have identified as well. Okay, so what did we do, to manage the risks we have identified and assessed? So we've discussed and come up with mitigations to mitigate the 3 M's. So the first mitigations, okay, we know that we don't have enough volunteers, we don't have enough overnighters. So we actually start out a recruitment awareness talk at night. So instead of day, we do it at night because we want to attract over night hours. Okay, so that's one. In order to better improve our screening, we actually include recruitment phases. So rather than sending applications and we invite you for interview, right, we do incorporate briefing sessions to share with you more on the volunteering role. What is the requirement? What is the commitment? To manage your expectations. After that, if let's say we are comfortable, we actually will invite you to a customized PS Emeritus program. PS programs will be, it's like a super customized for potential volunteers. In a way, we also give volunteers the exposure on what is SOS approach. and give them, the experience to apply it, whether they are comfortable or not. Okay, if let's say they are comfortable, we move on to one-to-one interview where we will assess their emotional maturities as well as, very importantly, their motivation. Okay, after that, we send them for training assessment. So this is how we actually mitigate misalignment. Under miscommunications, of course, orientation, sharing on policies, sharing on regulations, acknowledgement of agreement for the volunteers to signify that they actually understand the requirements. If, let's say, you are official SOS volunteers, we will actually send weekly emails, newsletters to keep you updated on the latest happenings of the agencies. And we will have feedback channels as well. So apart from emails, we do have WhatsApp. Okay. Next one, misfits, very important. What do we do to arrange, to mitigate the risk of volunteers feeling misfit and volunteers feeling burnt out? Regular check-ins and engagement. So with the help of our crisis support team, which is our colleague in the phone room, as well as our volunteer leaders. So they will act as support to our volunteers. Other than that, if let's say our volunteers need more professional support, we have an EAP service program. EAP stands for Employment Assistance Program, where we will actually send our volunteers for professional counseling. When the volunteers actually feel a bit stagnant doing the same thing over and over again, they will get burnout as well. So we will have more diversified volunteering role, volunteering opportunities available. Example, we do have volunteers who are getting burnt out of keep on receiving the negative thoughts from the callers, from the distress. So instead of withdrawing, we ask the volunteers if, let's say, they want to support us in another way, which is like volunteer interview, as well as facilitating of workshop. So these are the measures that we put in place to mitigate the risk of volunteer feeling misfit. Okay, so after we set in the measurements and everything is in control, of course, we will need to monitor and review the risk on a periodic basis in order to stay relevant. So what do we do to monitor? Of course, all the reports. We have monthly reports, all the stats. We have meetings once a month to discuss on and review on the risk. So if, let's say, there's a need, we will propose additional measures. Okay, take for instance, we have to review our VM framework before we launch our SOS Care test, because it's actually another new set of rules, right? On recruitment, on training, on deployment and engagement as well. Yeah, so this is one example that we actually propose additional measures. Okay. Of course, dealing with risk management, right, has its own set of challenges. So I actually call it the risk on top of the risk. Yeah. So, but despite the challenge, we actually find it pretty useful, and I'll dive into that a bit later. So we talk about the challenges first, the risk of the risk. Okay. What kind of challenges that we have faced when we, implement risk management? First of all, of course, is the uncertainties on the effectiveness. So, we are not sure how effective our plans will be. And there will always be this question hanging in the air, or what we have discussed and put in place actually work. And also uncertainties will create that fear when it comes to implementations. I will use our training refresher sessions as a context in this area. So we wanted to roll out refresher sessions for our volunteers. But we wonder if, let's say, it will generally reduce the risk of service inconsistency, and if the volunteers would generally find it helpful. So it is really like navigating a fog of uncertainties when we implement risk management. Second challenges we have is interrelated risk. So, you all know domino effect. So when one falls, right, it will create like chain reaction. So for example, when we implement refresher sessions, which is to mitigate the risk of service inconsistency, it will actually ripples into the training department, posing the risk of, they may have a risk of manpower constraints or resource utilizations. Okay, so interconnected risk will happen. The last one, which is quite, to me, quite challenging, which is behavioral of stakeholders. How would the volunteers feel if, let's say, they are invited for refresher. So we just, if let's say volunteers are invited, some volunteers may feel that, is it that skills are not up to par? Would they see as an additional commitment, a leisure commitment, rather than a very helpful learnings for them? So convincing stakeholders is also one challenge that we have faced when we implement the risk mitigations on service inconsistency. Okay, so how do we kind of like mitigate the challenge, that means the risk of the risk? Okay. Yeah, I realized when I do this slide, I realized there's the 3 C's. Okay, first of all, we co-create. So we collaborate with relevant stakeholders. Forming task force that comprises of volunteers, trainers, and the VM team. Actually, it's very helpful because you can get inputs from various angles. Things like whether the content, the relevancy of the content, the timelines, and the resource available. So ensuring your relevancy in content, especially for refresher, is actually very important. Yeah. Next up will be timely communication. We have to ensure that there will be a two-way communication, which after the task force discussion, we actually kick off with a pilot first. So we involve only a handful of volunteers. We kick off the refresher, then we get their feedback, and after that, after the sessions, we tweak the things to make it more relevant. After which we will look into volunteers to spread the words about the refresher sessions through their testimonials. After which we will conduct regular check-ins, can be face-to-face, can be our biannual survey. Find out from the volunteers how they find the training, where did we really hit the mark. So these 3 C's, right, actually help us to reduce the fear of uncertainty. So that's one. Lower the probabilities of interrelated risk, as well as more smoothen the effort of getting buy-in. Okay. Actually, after implementation, then we realized that risk management, right, is really an ongoing process. So it really involves continuous identifications, assessment, and mitigations of potential risks. This is to ensure that SOS is prepared to handle challenges. Well, it also helps to promote resilience and effective risk mitigations over time. Okay. Lastly, I'll share about how useful that we have found the process. It's another 3 C's again. So first of all, complement decision making. If you still remember, we actually add in the BS Samaritans programs to our screening process. Actually, this can really help mitigate the operational risk of staff facing burnout as well. Yeah. So by implementing risk management, it helps us to enrich our understanding of the situations, then guide us towards to appropriate resolutions. Okay. Well, apart from that, continuity of services. So I will mention more about our continuity plan. So risk management is like having a safety net for our services. So take the pandemic, for example. If let's say it didn't happen, we won't think about, okay, what will happen if let's say we need to shut down our phone room operations? What will happen to the callers if let's say no one is attending to them? So this got us realize the importance of having a continuity plan. Okay. And our last of all is all about giving confidence to our stakeholders, regardless if it's clients, the volunteers, or even the funders. So when we roll out refresher programs for our volunteers, it's not only about maintaining service consistency, but also providing the reassurance to our clients when they reach out for support. That means they will receive the relevant support from SOS. Big picture wise, it actually help to build trust and faith among the funders in our agencies. Yeah. So for there you go, I have the 3 C's value when we implement the risk management. Okay. With that, I shall end my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Now I shall pass the time back to Chris.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate you giving your time to speak to our audience as well. Great to hear some of the insights from actually being able to implement some of these risk management strategies on the ground. Obviously, I think a lot of our audience may have resonated with you when you said, hey, actually, where to start with this whole process? What do I do? What are the first steps? And around creating that audit and risk committee, as you said, and really looking at your processes within the organization and linking that back to the enterprise risk management, sorry, that Professor Ho mentioned at the beginning. So I heard there as well that you made it highly contextual to the Samaritans organization. You know, you gave some examples there around, you know, the midnight recruitment calls, because then we were really targeting where our volunteers were and the audience we were trying to get. So some of those real mitigation factors and addressing some of the volunteer challenges with misfits and miscommunication. So thank you for really contextualizing that and for walking us through your process to identify, then assess and monitor and review, which is obviously a continual process within the SSA, and obviously a lot of our audience can take forward. I really enjoyed the kind of the uncertainties of the effectiveness as well. I think everyone will be in that situation of being unsure of the actual outcome, but the key message there is obviously to start taking some of these steps and measuring them, as Professor Ho said at the beginning, what's measurable we can act on, to start measuring some of these areas and to put our foot forward to kind of mitigate some of these challenges that we face contextually. So thank you for sharing your insights there. At this point, I would like to invite the other speakers to rejoin us for our Q&A session that we have. So we've got our 3 speakers, and we'll be joined by Ms. Wei Lei as well, who partnered with Professor Ho on the risk management. Now, if you have questions for our panel, obviously it's been great to see some of those questions come through the session today through the Mentimeter. But if you have any other questions for our panel, please do continue to pop those into the Mentimeter throughout, or you can upvote questions that other people have asked as well. So I will kick us off. We've had a number of those coming through, but we'll just start off with, we've got some general ones and we've got some that are specific to some of our speakers. So the first one we're going to kick off with is, as an SSA, how can we ensure that volunteers understand the implications of risks and breaches? I think this is quite important. Obviously, Melvin, you spoke earlier about really some of those implications, but how do we translate this into how we manage our volunteers? I'll open the floor.
Well, I guess the very first thing is you have to make your mission, your particular mandate, accessible to your volunteers. So it comes with education, it comes with awareness. So you may want to think about how best to brief and how best to prepare your volunteers. And obviously this goes into recruiting your volunteers as well. So the thought process needs to translate there. The other thing that I will say, and I think that the rest will have more to add on to this, is that you may have to consider calibrating or recalibrating as you go along in the volunteer journey with your volunteers, because they have to be reminded and constantly refreshed as to the objective of the work that and the good work, excuse me, that you're trying to do here. Yeah.
Thank you, Melvin. Jeff, would you have anything to add on there in terms of from the perspective of on the ground with an SSA?
In a way, how can we let the volunteers know it, like the importance of having?
How do we ensure that they really get to grips and understand the implications of risks and breaches?
Actually, for us, it all starts way beginning when we first do the briefing. So we will convey everything to them first. Yeah, so they have to understand the importance of the implications first. Then they will have to decide whether is it the right fit for them. So after which we also understand that humans sometimes we need constant reminders. So we will have constant reminders during training, during orientation as well. So all these have to be put in place, all these sessions. Yeah, this is what we have implemented.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the volunteer induction and training is very critical in the sense that we need to ensure that the volunteers know what they are getting themselves into, right? So that we also be able to list for them what are the challenges, not to frighten them away, but to allow them to come and serve with eyes wide open, right?
Yeah, so a clear briefing to them, not just in terms of expectation setting as well, so that they're clear of your expectations and of them. Okay. We've heard from the speakers as we've gone through about the different roles to play within the organizations and how we can influence our overall risk management strategy. And one of the questions that came through was, how can a volunteer management practitioner contribute to the business continuity plan? Isn't that just for management to do? So, yeah, I mean, I'll open the floor to this one.
Maybe I take this question since I haven't had a chance to speak. At the same time, I'll just answer a few questions because some of you all have asked. So I think one of the participants did ask about the toolkit for 2024, as what Prof has highlighted. There will be a event for the launch of the 2024 risk management toolkit. So stay tuned to that. We were waiting for charities unit to give us the final go ahead. So that will be definitely this quarter. So following this launch itself, just to give a little bit context, when 2016, when we did the launch, following that launch, there will be respective different trainings as well as workshop for the charity sectors, because this is also one of the questions that has been asked whether KPMG conduct any of the training. So we definitely will work together with MCCY, charities in this space itself. So again, stay tuned to that. So going back to the question on the BCP, I think as a volunteer, you are also very much in tune into the whole activities within the organization. So that being said, if you recall what Prof had highlighted in the slides itself, as a volunteer, if today I'm a volunteer, in actual fact, I'm also volunteering in one of the charities as a board member. So again, stating the example of me as a board member, I do also need to appreciate what are the activities, what are risks that will potentially be in place in my position. So that is the event understanding, which is a risk event understanding. That is part of the whole preparation for if a crisis happen, as what Prof has highlighted, like a cybersecurity. What do you do? How do you react? How do you respond? How do you recover? So likewise, if you are not a board, but if you are actually assisting them in terms of other activities, you also need to make sure that you appreciate this element of risk, as well as later on in terms of the what I call it corrective action plans. Everybody has a part to play within a organization, including you as a volunteer. So I hope that also addresses that issue itself or the question itself.
No, I agree in that sense. I think volunteers has a part to play. In that, it provides additional information to the management. And sometimes it depends, you're talking volunteers at the board level, volunteers at the ground. I think at the ground level, the volunteers are able to provide information to the management, which they don't see. So for example, the type of risk exposed in the programs that's being conducted, or even the environments or exposures, right? So in that sense, that the volunteers work closely with the management and with the board to provide information to constantly plug any possible risk gaps. Right? And I think it has to be a so-called two-way approach, because the danger always will be that management or even the board level could do a risk planning or risk management from a theoretical, from a desktop perspective. Right? They don't know exactly what is happening on the ground. And this is where the volunteers can provide the kind of feedback.
Thank you. Yeah, so here that every volunteer has a key role to play, whether you're on the ground within the organization or at a more strategic level. And it's like we were thinking about in that activity, how can we influence the overall organization's risk management strategy? We're all crucial to that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So if we move on to the next one and some of our more popular questions, we've got a question here, which is BCM, BCP, ESG, ERM. How do I make better sense of all these? Where do I start? What would our advice for the SSAs being in terms of where can we put our first step forward?
I suppose, I come from a very straightforward, very practical. As a volunteer, you ask yourself the question, going back to just now, again, all of you talk about the activities that you are involved in. So you as an individual, again, like what are the risks that you face, and then what are later on your mitigating, and what are later on your corrective action. So just now Jeffrey talked about like interconnectivity of the risk. Likewise, the framework are also interconnected. So like in Prof 4 slides, we already have the ERM linking to BCP. That's one type of the interconnection. Then at Melvin's side, he also mentioned about the legality part of the risk, which is part of one portion of the entire risk universe that we talk about. And obviously, the latest hot topic that we talk about is ESG risk, which again it's again part of the whole entire universe of the different type of risks that we see, or different types of events that we see. So to me, these are all the terminologies that we use across the different frameworks. So what is very important to all of us is what is more important, very important to you and to your organization. What are the things that if you don't do it well, it will derail you? As simple as that. So I put aside all the framework. I just need to consider like what matters to me and matters to the organization. So that will help you to frame a little bit better, as well as to, I would use the word narrow your attention a little better. It is no point going through this whole jungle of different jargon, and then you don't know, I mean, as in you know a little bit of little pieces, but it's more importantly is, I always tell my client, when it comes to the entire risk identification, it's no point going through like, I have like 30 risks. Why don't you just focus on the top 3 to 5? If you cannot even manage or address or take the opportunity for 3 to 5 risks, no point going through the rest of the other 15 or 20. I mean, that's my 2 cents worth of comments in this.
No, you see, I think it's important for us to realize that the world constantly evolves. Look at the charity sector 20 years ago, there was no issue about PDPA, right? It doesn't even exist, right? See, so I think as the world evolves, we get more complicated, and also realize that it is important for us to take a defensive move in order to provide quality care to our beneficiaries. So let's assume that you are a healthcare charity. The Healthcare Services Act 2020 imposes a whole slew of new things, right? For example, on the board of directors or the board of governors. So these are constant pressure in the landscape to ensure that charities conduct themselves in a manner that really helps the beneficiary. They are not just additional pain per se, but it is a constant evolving expectations, right? So I think the volunteers on the ground, the governors, the management have to understand that the charities becomes more sophisticated over time, right? And we need to constantly up our game to provide the quality of services to our beneficiaries. And that is something that we have to move with the time. And my advice to the volunteers, don't be afraid. I think these are not rocket science. We just have to read up. We just and don't forget to the Singapore government through the charity council and operators provide funding for us to learn. The volunteer capacity, right? Capacity building fund, charity capacity building fund, right? These are funds available for us to engage companies to help us to do risk management, to help us to do business continuity plan, or to help us to plug those gaps that we are struggling to know more, right? So you will never be alone. I think that is to me the message. Not Liverpool, you'll never walk alone as it is.
I'm sensing a Liverpool fan. Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely key there. And I think we've got a follow-on question, or a linked question, which is directed at Jeff when you talked about your implementation of risk management. And the question was, which were the key stakeholders that you engaged to develop an effective risk management strategy? And we had a similar question around who should be in an ECG task force. Is it finance, IT, operations management? So yeah, with the key stakeholders to engage on this.
Actually, it's a very good question. So for us, when we first started, apart from having an audit and risk committees, actually very importantly, you need to assign someone to be a compliance officer. So by this compliance officer, it will actually help to review all the governance, and he or she is basically the bridge between the operation side, the management side, as well as the committee sides. So we work closely together. So compliance officers is also one of our audit and risk committee members. So it's very important role to help us. It's actually a very important role that this person help the management to process on the risk management, and as well as help us to think of the importance. How can we mitigate the risk? What kind of measures that we can think of, to reduce the likelihood of occurrence, etc., etc. So, to me, I felt that compliance officer really helped us a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Yeah. So I think linking it again with what Professor Ho said just now in terms of not walking alone, that actually we don't need to be daunted by this process. There are very clear steps and there are very clear people that we can engage in moving forward within our organizations. I want to shift the focus slightly to the volunteers themselves. And one of the questions that came out of the Q&A was, are volunteers unreliable? And the inherent risks associated with this. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to reframe the narrative a little bit around volunteers and their reliability. Obviously, it's linked to a few factors around their type of work and the support system that we create around them and the environment that they operate within. But I'll just open it up to the floor to that question and how you see this.
Question is, how reliable are the volunteers?
Yes, and some of the things that we can do to mitigate that and to ensure that actually that's not the stereotype moving forward.
Okay, reliability for myself, my personal view, actually depends on the VM. In order to get the reliability, of course, you will need to. The VM are the ones who screen the volunteers. So you will know, you get to understand whether these volunteers, can be reliable to run your services. Yeah. For example, in SOS, the reason why we have very intense recruitment phases is also because we know that their volunteering role is very different. They are here to attend to crisis, to attend to distress callers. So first of all, they need to be kind of like hold the accountabilities to the volunteers, to the clients as well. So in order to ensure that, we have put in place the recruitment phases, and volunteer management teams are involved in all the screening process. Yeah, so whoever actually passed our screening process, we will deem it as they are reliable, a group of people. Yeah, so that's my experience. That's my question, answers to the inquiry.
Thank you. Yeah, I hear that, the robustness of actually the screening around the volunteer and how do we ensure that we get the right volunteers for what we need? How is the expectation that we talked about before brought in, the accountability for them in their roles to those service users, which then has a knock-on impact on their own commitment and their reliability towards us as an organization.
So I guess a volunteer for SOS is really critical because it's talking about life and death exam. So in that sense, I really agree and appreciate the tight screening. So I think I always start with a basic positive proposition. Anyone that volunteers, I think we should prima facie on the surface actually appreciate the time. They could have used the time to do many other things under the sun, but they chose to volunteer. I think we can start on the appreciation part of it. But having said that, I think we also need to have a robust process and also time for us to be able to assess. So for example, in one of the charity that I sat on, how to become a board member. You don't immediately come in as a board member. You start serving on the committee first, right? As a non-board, on a board committee, but not as a board member first. So therefore, it allows the management, it allows the rest of the volunteer to size up the person with proper training, with proper induction. But we also, at the end of the day, to be able to have opportunity to observe your volunteers. I think sometimes the danger with charity is that we are so short of people. We grab anyone who can find. Whoever raised their hand, we will take. Right? So I think that can be a recipe for disasters. So the charity need to have robust process with a clear thought pattern that whoever volunteers, we appreciate them. However, not all of them are suitable. You see what I mean? They are not bad. They are just not suitable. You see what I mean? So I think we need to burn in all those processes to allow us to evaluate, help us to come to a conclusion with proper training to be able to assign them actually the more critical functions. You see, right? They are reliable as a prima facie, right? Until proven otherwise. You see.
Yeah, what do I add? That's why volunteer management are here.
But thank
I
you.
think- Sorry,
Oh,
Chris. No, I was just about to say, I think the important thing to remember is we can't do the good work that we do without the volunteers. So that's a fundamental premise to start from. We need people to do the good work. So it's incumbent upon all of us who are in a position or having the latitude and ability to make sure that we support them. And that relates to the reliability that Jeff and both Prof. Ho spoke about.
Thank you for your input there, Melvin. Yeah, absolutely, that's key. And the next question actually I think lands a little bit at your door, Melvin, but was obviously open to the floor as well. And it's around insurance. And is it necessary to provide insurance to volunteers that engage in our programs? There are some obviously challenges around different finances and different policies. So essentially for volunteer managers, is insurance essential? Is it something that's important? And actually linked to this a little bit, we've also got a question that's, if they're at risk, our volunteers, can we not just get them to sign a waiver?
Right. Well, I mean, at the risk of being overly lawyerly and giving you the standard lawyer's answer, it depends, right? Because even if you get insurance, there are terms and conditions as to the insurance, as to what it covers. So obviously, if the volunteer, for instance, acts in a way that is outside of his or her scope of what the volunteer duties are supposed to be, then no insurance will cover you, because that was never the terms upon which you entered insurance for. Whether or not insurance is necessary, I think at the end of the day, the volunteer manager and the organization as a whole needs to take a close look at the work or the scope that you wish the volunteers to engage in, because it is a lot more controllable or within more control, I would say, if employees take on work that I would say may attract the potential for things to go wrong as opposed to a volunteer. You see, also it's a balance. You see, because the premium that you're spending on the insurance, you have to be sure that first and foremost it's worth that aspect. Because if your volunteers are a lot, there's many of them, then obviously it impacts the financial outlay of the company as well. And for the most part, many of our organizations and the people that are here that are doing good work, they are charities as well. So we have to factor that in as well. I think if we are looking at insurance, it's worth exploring if that's something that you're concerned about in terms of potential liability. I think the open-mindedness or the informed way to go about it is to go into the conversation, understanding that insurance is not a catch-all. It doesn't cover every situation. So you have to ask yourself, what do you want the insurance for? And you may want to approach it from a risk management perspective, whether or not you could scope the potential liability that volunteers may be exposed to in their work that they're doing with you, and whether or not you could apportion it perhaps in such a way that even if you were to take on insurance, it would not be as pricey as it would otherwise.
So I want to chip in this. You see, we talk about volunteer insurance. Let's confine to the directors and officers. I think it is important for us to understand that actually you should buy directors and officers liability insurance for your board members. You see, they serve you, risking their reputation to serve you for pro bono. You see, if you have an unhappy client for whatever reason, they may end up suing not just a charity but also the directors. And for unfortunate problem, they get dragged into this whole thing. Remember the NKF saga? The directors themselves were basically brought to court too. Right? So of course, to be fair, like what Melvin said, there is no insurance indemnity for negligence. That is clear case as it is. But unfortunately, you also want the director to serve with a peace of mind. You see, I mean, the court case may not win against them, but you drag them through the mud. You see, Right? You see, I mean, and they have to worry about getting their own lawyers to defend them for all their whatever things they do. You see, I mean, right? So I am a board member. I would have significant difficulty serving on a charity on the board if they tell me, Prof, we don't have D&O insurance, you know. Right? I have to say that I'm so sorry if I kiasu or kiasi, you know. But I think we have to give the volunteer that kind of also a peace of mind. You know? What does the rest of the speaker think?
Actually, before that, that's actually precisely what I'm saying in terms of if you're getting insurance, be quite specific as to who you're getting it for. And obviously, if you can scope it, then it'll be helpful. The other thing I wanted to say is we don't even have to go that far back, Prof, in terms of directors getting into trouble. Just in the last year alone, many directors, even independent directors, got into trouble, even though they were just helping out, if you will.
Well, thank you for your inputs there. Obviously, insurance is a crucial consideration for a lot of the SSAs and a highly important one. And you mentioned there, obviously, Prof, around negligence, and there's been a question that's come up in the group that I think is worth just airing. A few people have jumped on this about the recent instance of a volunteer who was jailed for 6 months due to negligence, which unfortunately cost a student's life. So the panel has been asked on their opinions and thoughts around this case.
Well, very quickly, if we were to just look at the facts of that case, unfortunately, he didn't do what he was supposed to do, meaning the volunteer, and it resulted in the death of a student. So obviously, there's criminal liability there, and clearly, when he was engaged to carry out his role as a volunteer, he was definitely instructed or given the responsibility to make sure the steps were followed. So clearly you can see a distinction there between what the job was supposed to be, if you will, the role was supposed to be, and what the volunteer ended up doing. The one more thing I want to add is that apart from the volunteer who has been dealt with, the company as well as the employee of the company are also under investigations right now. So there could be further charges that are knocked on from that.
So maybe one of the bad news I want to have for the volunteers as it is, one of the things I learned over the years is that even if when I render any services, even it's pro bono, actually I'm fully liable to give you my best shot as it is, because I cannot be offering a service with negligence. Because it's free, therefore I only give you 30%, efforts as it is. I think this is something that volunteers has to understand, right? When it comes to assessment of liabilities, when it comes to assessment of duty of care, we cannot hide behind the fact that I'm only a volunteer. No, I was not paid, therefore I'm not responsible. So I think this is where we really want to put all our eggs in one basket. You see, right?
Yeah, I actually agree. Well, we will also emphasize the accountabilities to our volunteers as well. So in SOS, we emphasize our accountabilities, as general as accountability to the shift and also to the client. But fortunately for SOS, we don't have such cases yet. But regardless, if let's say there's cases that involve legal, the staff will actually step in first before required support from the volunteers. So yeah, so that is one of the measures that we implement. So far, cross my finger, yeah, we okay, yeah.
Sorry, Chris, it's important for volunteers or volunteer managers, especially since this is our audience, to understand that being a volunteer is not an excuse for when things go wrong. Yeah, so that's a very important understanding to have from the get-go.
Thank you very much, and I know there's been a diverse range of questions there. So in the interest of time, I want to honour the contact that we've made with our participants. Thank you very much to our panel for not only taking the time to speak, but to also answer the questions for our audience today. I think we've taken away some really valuable insights from a broad spectrum here that can really help our SSAs, our volunteer managers, take a step forward in approaching their risk management strategies. So thank you very much on behalf of Korn Ferry, of NCSS, and our audience today. I'd love to just accelerate into sharing some of the resources that are available to you, to our volunteer managers as participants. You've seen today the value and importance of risk management and the necessity of doing so for your organization. So please do take this away to your organizations, interact with other SSAs, exchange knowledge, exchange best practices, be innovative around how you can mitigate the risks. But NCSS does have some resources available to you. They'll be sharing a guide with you on PDPA, protecting data after the event. They'll also be uploading it on their Tech and Go website. The volunteer management toolkit has also been posted on the resource hub, so that's available for you. It has a section on volunteer risk management in there, so please do take the time to go through it. And specifically for the SSAs in today's session, the Social Service Sector Survey for 2023 has also been released, so we do ask and encourage participation from all agencies. Please do look out for that in your email coming through. The survey is a really key part of gathering data within the sector and understanding the state of volunteer management and how NCSS can best support you moving forward. So thank you very much for your time in attending today. We do have one more session available in this program that comes in March, so do keep an eye out for the emails coming through for that. We'd love to see you all again. And before you go, we'd also love to take just a few minutes of your time. It is a very short survey, but we'd love to get some inputs from you so that we can help refine our service to you moving forward. So please, could you just scan the QR code for us, click on the link, and there's some very short questions. We'd love some of your feedback, because ultimately we're here to work with you and to offer you some of the services that can really add value for you in the sector. So please, we'd really appreciate you taking a few extra minutes just to complete that for us before you sign off, log off, and enjoy the rest of your days. But I would just love to thank our speakers once more for joining us, giving up their valuable time, sharing their experiences and their insights from the sector, and also to our participants for making their time to come and attend today. Together, we're moving the sector forward. You know, Prof showed some great data around the progress that's been made in risk management. There's still a way to go. We can get there together. So NCSS are here to support you. The sector is here. We're moving forward together. So thank you very much for your time today. We'd really appreciate if you could finish those questions up just before you disappear. There's lots of thank you messages coming in to the speakers, to the panel, from our audience. So yeah, it's not just one man's appreciation here. There's a lot of appreciation for the time you've given up today. So thank you very much. We've got 1 minute over, so I'll honor the contract and we'll love to see you again for our next session in March. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.